Imagine waking up one day to discover that the person you trusted most has betrayed you in a way so twisted, so unimaginable, it leaves you questioning everything. In this dark tale of love, deception, and revenge, you'll follow my journey as I unravel the web of lies spun by the woman I thought was my soulmate, me wife, and her two sisters. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about how far one man can go to take back control. Stay with me, because the ending will leave you speechless and questioning the true cost of revenge. Chapter 1. The Perfect Lie. From the outside, my life looked flawless. My wife, Elizabeth Liz, to everyone else was the epitome of charm and grace. Together, we were the power couple of our Chicago neighborhood, envied by friends, admired by colleagues. She worked in marketing, effortlessly juggling campaigns and social events, while I managed a thriving tech startup. People said we were the kind of couple you only see in movies, the ones where everything seems too good to be true. And maybe deep down I knew they were right. It started with small things, like the way Liz would laugh a little too hard at her sister's jokes or the knowing glances they exchanged when I walked into the room. Amanda and Susan, her younger sisters, were frequent visitors to our home. They'd drop by unannounced, drink my whiskey, and sprawl on our couch like they owned the place. At first, I found their bond endearing. Family is everything, Liz would say with that radiant smile that could disarm anyone. But cracks began to form in the polished veneer of our lives. Liz started coming home later than usual, brushing off my questions with vague excuses about last-minute meetings. The sisters were always around, even when she wasn't. Their laughter echoed through the walls, mocking me in ways I couldn't yet understand. One evening, as I cleared away the wine glasses they'd left behind, I found a note crumpled beneath the table. It wasn't addressed to me, but the words felt like a slap. He doesn't suspect a thing. It's almost too easy. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I told myself it was probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. The following weeks were a blur of growing suspicion. I'd catch Liz staring at her phone, her expression shifting between amusement and guilt. I overheard whispered conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. I started to feel like an intruder in my own home, an outsider in the relationship I'd built with her. Then came the night that changed everything. A business trip got canceled last minute, and I decided to surprise Liz. I parked a block away, tiptoed into the house, and froze at the sound of muffled voices. Their laughter, Liz's and her sister's, drifted from the living room, sharp and cruel. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "And he still has no idea," Liz said, her voice dripping with mockery. Amanda and Susan erupted in laughter. I stepped into the room, my face a mask of calm despite the storm raging inside me. "What's so funny?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. They stopped laughing, their faces a mix of shock and amusement. Liz recovered first, her lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, nothing you'd understand," she said, her tone dismissive. But I understood enough. In that moment, something inside me broke. Or maybe something inside me woke up. Chapter 2. Sisterly Bond. The days following that night were a blur of unease and observation. Liz and her sisters carried on as if nothing had happened, their carefree attitudes only fueling the storm inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played for a fool, their private joke. I started watching them more closely, noticing things I had overlooked before. Amanda, the middle sister, was the bold one, always the first to crack a joke at someone else's expense. She had a sharp tongue and a wild streak that Liz often dismissed as harmless fun. Susan, the youngest, seemed quieter, more reserved, but her subtle smirks betrayed a cunning mind. Together, the three of them were like a pack of wolves, and I was their unwitting prey. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. Liz wasn't there, but Amanda and Susan were lounging in the living room. They didn't even try to hide their annoyance at my presence. "W here is Liz?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Amanda shrugged, her eyes never leaving her phone. "Out," she said simply. "Out where?" Susan chuckled, exchanging a glance with Amanda. "Probably somewhere you wouldn't like," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "What's that supposed to mean?" Amanda finally looked up, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Relax, Mike. You are so uptight these days. Maybe you should take a page out of Liz's book learn to have some fun." Their laughter followed me as I left the room, my blood boiling. I didn't need a confession to know what they were implying. Whatever Liz was doing, wherever she was, it wasn't something she wanted me to know about. That night, I started piecing together a plan. If they thought they could laugh at me, manipulate me, and get away with it, they were wrong. I wasn't going to confront Liz, not yet. Confrontation meant giving her the power to deny, to manipulate, to turn the tables on me. No, I needed something stronger. Proof. A few days later, I followed Liz. She said she was meeting a client for dinner, but her destination told a different story. I parked across the street from a dimly lit bar, watching as she entered. Moments later, Amanda and Susan joined her. They greeted each other with conspiratorial smiles before disappearing inside. I waited for hours, my patience worn thin, until they finally emerged. Liz stumbled slightly, her arm draped around Amanda's shoulders as they laughed together. Susan was on the phone, her voice too distant to hear. They didn't notice me sitting in the shadows, watching, listening, seething. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Whatever they were hiding, it wasn't just a fleeting mistake. This was calculated, intentional betrayal they shared and reveled in. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between Liz and Amanda. I had stepped outside to grab my phone from the car and returned quietly, unnoticed. "He's so predictable," Liz said, her tone laced with contempt. "It's almost boring." Amanda laughed. "At least he's useful. For now." I stood frozen in the hallway, their words cutting deeper than I thought possible. They weren't just mocking me, they were using me. That night, as Liz slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. The betrayal wasn't just hers, it was theirs. All three of them. The bond they shared, the secrets they kept, the way they laughed at my expense, it all made me sick. But I wouldn't be the fool they thought I was. They'd underestimated me, and that was their first mistake. Chapter 3. A crack in trust. I didn't confront Liz right away. I knew her too well, she was too sharp, too skilled at twisting words and manipulating emotions. If I went in unprepared, I'd leave the conversation more confused than when I started. Instead, I waited, quietly gathering pieces of the puzzle. It wasn't long before I noticed the cracks in her facade. Liz had always been a smooth liar, but now I caught her slipping. Like the time I asked how her meeting with Amanda went, and she hesitated for a fraction of a second too long before answering. Or the time I mentioned a bar downtown, and she blinked in confusion before pretending to recognize the name. Her phone became her constant companion, always clutched tightly in her hand or tucked safely away in her purse. When it buzzed with messages, she would glance at the screen and smile to herself before quickly locking it. One evening, I decided to test her. We were sitting on the couch, the television playing some forgettable sitcom in the background. Liz was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "Who's texting you?" I asked casually. She barely looked up. "Just Amanda," she said, her tone dismissive. "Anything interesting?" Her fingers froze for the briefest moment before she resumed typing. "Nothing you'd care about," she said with a tight smile. That was when I knew. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't something she wanted me to see. The following weekend, I found an opportunity to get closer to the truth. Liz left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she showered, something she never did. My heart raced as I approached it, my hands trembling slightly. I unlocked her phone using the code I'd memorized months ago and quickly scanned her messages. Most were mundane texts from coworkers, group chats with friends, but then I found the thread with Amanda and Susan. The messages were cryptic, but the tone was unmistakable. Amanda: "So when's the next family night?" Liz: "Not sure. He's been suspicious lately." Susan: "Just let us know. I am always up for some fun." My stomach churned. They were mocking me, planning something behind my back. I couldn't make sense of the full picture yet, but I knew I was on the right track. Later that night, Liz mentioned that Amanda and Susan were coming over for dinner. "We haven't had a proper family night in ages," she said, her tone light and cheerful. I forced a smile. "Sounds great." As I cooked in the kitchen, I listened to their conversation, straining to pick up anything incriminating. But they were careful. Their words veiled in inside jokes and vague comments. Every laugh felt like a dagger to my chest. At one point, Amanda wandered into the kitchen, leaning casually against the counter. "You are quiet tonight," she said, her eyes sharp and probing. "Just tired," I replied, not meeting her gaze. She smirked, as if she didn't believe me. "You should relax more, Mike. Life's too short to be so serious all the time." I clenched my jaw but said nothing. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the living room, replaying the evening in my mind. Their laughter, their glances, the way they seemed to share a private joke, I wasn't a part of it all added up to one thing. They were hiding something. But I couldn't confront them yet, not until I had more. Chapter 4. The Path of Betrayal. The night they laughed in my face was the last time I allowed myself to feel powerless. I'd been standing there, a silent witness to their mockery, and something inside me shifted. If they wanted to treat me like a fool, I'd play along, but on my terms. The first step was simple: surveillance. Liz had grown careless, believing her charm and wit would keep me in the dark forever. I started tracking her movements, noting the times she left and returned, the places she frequented, the people she met. I wasn't just watching Liz, I was studying her. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Every Thursday evening, Liz had a meeting downtown. Amanda and Susan were almost always involved, their cars parked outside the same dingy bar on the corner of Waverly Street. I followed discreetly, sitting in my car with the engine off, watching as they laughed and drank, oblivious to my presence. One Thursday, I decided to get closer. I parked 2 blocks away and walked to the bar, pulling a baseball cap low over my face. The place was crowded, dimly lit, with the smell of stale beer hanging heavy in the air. I spotted them near the back, huddled together in a booth. Liz was sipping a cocktail, her head thrown back in laughter. Amanda leaned in, whispering something that made all 3 of them burst out laughing. I found a seat at the bar, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to eavesdrop. Their voices blended with the background noise, but I caught fragments of their conversation. Amanda, you think he suspects? Liz, if he does, he hasn't said anything. Honestly, it's almost boring. Susan, maybe we should mix things up. Make it more exciting. My grip tightened around my glass. Their words confirmed what I already knew. They didn't just see me as expendable. I was a source of entertainment for them. The next morning, Liz was unusually affectionate, as if trying to cover her tracks. She brought me coffee in bed, kissed my cheek, and asked about my plans for the day. Just work, I said, watching her closely. Her smile didn't falter, but I noticed the way her eyes darted away for a split second. As she left for yoga that afternoon, I checked her phone again. This time, the messages were more direct. Susan, last night was hilarious. Can't believe he's still clueless. Liz, he's too trusting. Makes it almost too easy. Amanda, when's the next round? They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. That evening, I sat in my office, staring at the wall as their words echoed in my mind. Clueless, trusting, easy. They thought they'd won, that I was too blind or too weak to see what was happening. But they'd made one critical mistake: underestimating me. I began researching everything I could about Amanda and Susan, their jobs, their finances, their relationships. Every detail became a piece of the puzzle. I discovered that Amanda had a habit of gambling away more money than she could afford. Susan, meanwhile, had a rocky work history, with whispers of fraud trailing her from one job to the next. Liz's hands weren't clean either. She'd siphoned money from our joint account to fund her escapades, covering her tracks just enough to avoid suspicion. But now, I was watching her every move. The following week, I planted a tracker on Liz's car. It was easy. She rarely paid attention to anything that didn't directly benefit her. Through the app on my phone, I watched as she drove to the same bar, the same pattern repeating itself. This time, I didn't stay outside. I walked into the bar, calm and deliberate, and took a seat at a table near the back. They didn't notice me at first, too engrossed in their conversation. He'd never guess, Liz was saying, her voice dripping with confidence. He's just so predictable. That was the moment I stood up, my shadow falling across their table. Liz's laughter died in her throat as she looked up at me, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Amanda and Susan froze, their drinks halfway to their lips. Predictable? I said, my voice low and steady. That's funny. I was just about to say the same about you. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was thick, suffocating. Then Liz recovered, forcing a smile. Mike, what are you doing here? Enjoying the show, I said, leaning against the table. It's been quite the performance. Their silence told me everything I needed to know. They were caught, and they knew it. But this was only the beginning. Chapter 5. The unraveling begins. The silence at the table stretched on, their shock palpable. I could see it in Liz's wide eyes, in the way Amanda's smirk faltered, in the nervous glance Susan shot toward the exit. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of control returning. Mike, Liz said finally, her voice soft, almost pleading. This isn't what it looks like. I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. It never is it? but I've got all the time in the world for you to explain. Liz opened her mouth, but Amanda cut in, her voice laced with defiance. Look, you are overreacting. We're just having drinks. Nothing to get worked up over. I turned my gaze to her, my expression cold. Amanda, do you think I am stupid? Because if that's what you are banking on, let me clear things up for you. I am not. She flinched but quickly recovered, crossing her arms and leaning back in her chair. Whatever you think you know, you've got it all wrong. Do I asked, pulling my phone from my pocket. I tapped the screen a few times before holding it up, displaying the string of incriminating messages I'd found. Liz's face drained of color, and even Amanda's bravado faltered. Susan shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Mike, it's not… Don't, I snapped, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. Don't insult me by pretending this isn't exactly what it looks like. The walk back to the car was silent. Liz trailed behind me, her once confident demeanor replaced by an air of defeat. I didn't say a word as we drove home, the tension between us a living, breathing thing. As soon as we stepped inside, she rounded on me. How long have you been spying on me? She demanded, her voice sharp. I met her gaze, unflinching. Long enough. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted, my tone icy. You gave up the right to privacy the moment you started lying to me. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting away. It wasn't what you think, she said weakly. I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. You were going to sit there and tell me that you and your sisters weren't mocking me, that you weren't using me? Because I heard every word, Liz, every single word. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might confess. But instead, she looked at me with defiance. Fine, she said. Yes, we laughed. Yes, we kept secrets. But it's not as black and white as you think. Then explain it to me, I said, crossing my arms. She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for the right words. But nothing she said could change what I'd already uncovered. That night, Liz slept in the guest room. I stayed up, pacing the living room as my mind raced. The confrontation had only scratched the surface. Whatever she and her sisters were hiding, it went deeper than mocking texts and veiled conversations. I needed to push further, to dig into the parts of their lives they thought were untouchable. Liz, Amanda, and Susan weren't just three women who shared a bond. They were a conspiracy, a triumvirate of betrayal, and I was about to dismantle them piece by piece. The first step was Amanda. Her gambling habits were well documented, thanks to the receipts I'd found in Liz's purse and the tips I'd gleaned from following her. Susan was next, her financial records revealing a pattern of fraudulent activity that could ruin her if it ever came to light. But Liz was the linchpin. If I could crack her, the whole operation would crumble. The following morning, I sat across from Liz at the kitchen table. She looked tired, her usual poise replaced by a brittle tension. I want the truth, I said, my voice low but firm. She hesitated, her fingers curling around her coffee mug. About what? Everything. The lies, the secrets, the games you've been playing with Amanda and Susan. I want to know why. Her eyes darted to the door, as if considering an escape. But she stayed seated. It's complicated, she said finally. Uncomplicate it, I demanded. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. Chapter 6. The Truth, or something like it. Liz's voice was quiet at first, her words measured, as if testing the waters. Mike, you have to understand, it wasn't supposed to get this far. I raised an eyebrow. Get what far, Liz? Mocking me? Lying to my face? Or letting your sisters treat me like a joke? She flinched at my tone but pressed on. It started as a distraction, she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Amanda and Suzanne, they've always been a little wild, a little reckless. When things started to feel stale between us, they encouraged me to loosen up. Loosen up? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. That's what you call it? It was supposed to be harmless, she snapped, her frustration finally breaking through. A few nights out, some laughs, nothing more. But it didn't stop there, I said coldly. Did it? She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. No, she admitted. It didn't. Liz took a shaky breath before continuing. Amanda was the one who pushed it further. She said I deserved more, that I shouldn't have to settle for this. She gestured vaguely, as if this encompassed everything we'd built together. And Susan? I prompted. She went along with it, Liz said, her tone bitter. She always follows Amanda's lead, but I I didn't think it would go this far. So what exactly did you think would happen, Liz? I asked, leaning forward. That I'd just sit here, oblivious, while you and your sisters laughed at me behind my back. What was the end game? Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. I don't know, she said softly. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I felt trapped, Mike, like my life was slipping away from me. Trapped? I repeated, my voice rising. You felt trapped in a marriage where I've done nothing but support you? Where I've given you everything you've ever wanted? She didn't answer, her silence speaking volumes. The conversation felt like a chess match, each of us maneuvering for control. But no matter how much she tried to justify her actions, her words rang hollow. I need you to be honest with me, Liz, I said, my tone hard. What's really going on? Because this isn't just about feeling trapped. This is something darker, isn't it? Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Amanda and Susan, they're in trouble, she admitted. Trouble? Financial trouble, she clarified. Amanda owes money to some very dangerous people. Susan got involved trying to help her, and now they're both in over their heads. And you thought dragging me into this would help how? They needed leverage, she said quietly. Something to keep them safe. Leverage? My stomach churned as the pieces clicked into place. You mean me? Liz nodded, tears streaming down her face. They said if I kept you distracted, if I played along, they'd handle it, that they wouldn't let anything bad happen. Her confession hit me like a freight train. I had been reduced to a pawn in their twisted game, a shield to protect them from the consequences of their own recklessness. So all of this, your lies, your laughter, your betrayal, it was all to keep me from seeing the truth? I asked, my voice cold and steady. Yes, she whispered, her face crumpling. I didn't know what else to do. I stared at her, my mind racing. Every instinct told me to walk away, to leave her and her sisters to deal with the mess they'd created. But something stopped me. This wasn't just about Liz or her betrayal. It was about power, control, and the fact that they thought they could use me and get away with it. You made your choice, Liz, I said finally, my voice devoid of emotion. Now it's my turn. That night, as Liz slept in the guest room, I began to put the final pieces of my plan into motion. They thought they had control, that they could manipulate me without consequences. But they were wrong. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my power. And when I was done, they would understand what it meant to cross me. Chapter 7. Setting the Trap. The following morning, Liz moved around the house like a ghost, her steps hesitant, her gaze avoiding mine. I let her silence hang, knowing it would eat at her more than any confrontation. While she wallowed in her guilt, perhaps her fear, I focused on my plan. First, I needed proof, not just of Liz's betrayal, but of Amanda's and Susan's involvement. Their financial troubles, their schemes, their lies, it all needed to come to light in a way they couldn't refute. Liz had let slip enough details about Amanda's gambling for me to know where to start. I tracked her movements over the next few days, confirming what I already suspected. Amanda wasn't just in debt, she was desperate. One evening, I followed her to a seedy underground poker game in the city. The room was thick with smoke and tension, the kind of place where debts weren't just settled with money. Amanda was seated at a table near the back, her face flushed with a mix of alcohol and adrenaline. I watched from a corner, unnoticed, as she played hand after hand, each loss deepening the crease between her brows. When she finally left, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I slipped out after her, careful to keep my distance. She met a man in the alley, a tall, broad-shouldered figure who exuded danger. Their conversation was heated, Amanda's voice rising as she pleaded for more time. I'll get it, I swear, she said, her voice shaking. Just give me another week. You are out of time, the man growled. If you don't pay up, we'll collect in other ways. You know how this works. Amanda's face crumpled, but she nodded, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Back at home, I compiled everything I'd learned. Amanda's debts, Susan's fraudulent dealings, Liz's involvement, it all formed a damning picture. But I needed more. I needed them to incriminate themselves. The next step was setting the bait. Liz's phone was my gateway. Over the past few days, she'd grown careless, leaving it unattended while she wallowed in the guest room. I used the opportunity to send a series of messages to Amanda and Susan, pretending to be Liz. We need to meet. Mike's getting suspicious. Bring everything. We need to make sure to here is no loose ends. The replies came quickly. Amanda, Fine. Tonight at my place. Susan, we'll sort this out. Just keep him out of it. That evening, I told Liz I was going out for a drive. She barely looked up from her spot on the couch, her face pale and drawn. I won't be long, I said, my voice neutral. Okay, she murmured, her gaze distant. I parked a block away from Amanda's house, my heart pounding as I approached. The lights were on, and through the partially drawn curtains, I could see the three of them seated at the kitchen table. Their faces were tense, their voices muffled but urgent. I positioned myself near the window, phone in hand, recording every word. I told you this was a bad idea, Susan was saying, her voice tight with panic. We didn't have a choice, Amanda shot back. Do you think I wanted to drag Liz into this? But she's the only one he trusts. Liz's voice was quiet, almost inaudible. He doesn't trust me anymore. He knows something's wrong. Then you need to fix it, Amanda said sharply. We can't afford to lose him now. Susan leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. What if he finds out about the money? He won't, Amanda said firmly. Liz has kept him in the dark this long. She'll handle it. The conversation continued, each word more damning than the last. They discussed Amanda's debts, Susan's fraud, and their plan to use me as their safety net. When I finally stepped away from the window, my hands were shaking not with fear, but with a cold, calculated rage. They had laid their cards on the table, and now I had everything I needed. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The pieces were in place, the trap set. All that remained was to spring it. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The morning after their meeting, I sat across from Liz at the breakfast table, watching her pick at her food. Her hands trembled as she lifted her coffee mug, her eyes avoiding mine. I could see the weight of her guilt bearing down on her, but I said nothing. Silence was my weapon now, and I wielded it with precision. The plan was simple. Expose them publicly, in a way that left no room for excuses or manipulation. I wasn't interested in petty revenge, I wanted absolute destruction. The first step was the video. The recording I'd captured outside Amanda's house was damning, but I needed it to reach the right audience. I edited the footage carefully, highlighting the most incriminating moments, their words crystal clear. Amanda, do you think I wanted to drag Liz into this, but she's the only one he trusts? Susan, what if he finds out about the money? Liz, he doesn't trust me anymore. He knows something's wrong. Their voices, their faces, it was all there. Undeniable proof of their betrayal and deceit. I uploaded the video anonymously to several social media platforms, tagging key individuals in Amanda's and Susan's lives colleagues, friends, even the man Amanda had pleaded with in the alley. Within hours, the video began to gain traction, the comments flooding in with disbelief and outrage. While the video spread, I turned my attention to Liz. She had no idea what was coming, no inkling of the storm I'd unleashed. That afternoon, as she sat in the living room scrolling through her phone, I placed a manila envelope on the coffee table in front of her. What's this? She asked, her voice wary. Open it, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Her fingers trembled as she unsealed the envelope, pulling out the printed screenshots of her texts, the financial records I'd uncovered, and a transcript of the video I'd recorded. Her face paled as she flipped through the pages, her eyes widening with each revelation. Mike, Save it, I said sharply. I don't want to hear your excuses. This is who you are, Liz, and now the whole world knows it. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she tried to assess the damage. The color drained from her face as she saw the video, the comments tearing into her and her sisters with brutal honesty. You had no right, she whispered, her voice shaking. I had every right, I shot back. You and your sisters made me a pawn in your little game. You used me, mocked me, lied to me. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. No pity, no regret, just the cold satisfaction of justice served. The fallout was immediate. Amanda's boss saw the video and fired her on the spot, citing damage to the company's reputation. Susan's fraud came to light, her name blacklisted in professional circles. Even the man Amanda owed money to took notice, his threats escalating as he demanded repayment. Liz, meanwhile, was left to face the wreckage of her carefully constructed facade. Friends distanced themselves, colleagues whispered behind her back, and her sisters, once her closest allies, turned on her in desperation. But the real blow came that evening, when I placed the divorce papers on the same coffee table. It's over, Liz, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Sign them, or I'll make sure here is nothing left of your reputation to salvage. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. "You are enjoying this, aren't you?" I met her gaze unflinching. "No, Liz, I am just making sure you understand what it feels like to lose everything." As she signed her name, the weight lifted from my shoulders. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my sense of self. I walked out of that house without looking back, the sound of her sobs echoing behind me. For the first time in months, I felt free. Chapter 9. The Collapse. The days that followed felt surreal, like walking through the aftermath of a storm. Liz, Amanda, and Susan were in freefall, each scrambling to salvage what little they could. But the damage was done. Amanda was the first to reach out. She called me late one night, her voice laced with desperation. "Mike, we need to talk," she said. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "About what?" "How you and your sisters turned my life into a sideshow." She hesitated, then sighed. "Look, I know we messed up, but this video, you don't understand what you've done." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied. "You and Susan are criminals, Amanda. Liz is just the puppet who let you pull the strings. Now the world knows the truth. Deal with it." "You think this is justice?" she snapped. "You think exposing us fixes anything? You've put us in danger, Mike. Real danger." The edge in her voice gave me pause. "What are you talking about?" "That man you saw me with," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's not someone you mess with. And thanks to you, he's watching our every move." Her words lingered in my mind long after the call ended. Part of me wanted to dismiss her as manipulative, another desperate ploy to regain control, but a nagging doubt remained. Amanda and Susan had crossed the line long before I got involved, but had I pushed them over the edge? The answer came the next morning, when I saw the news. A local paper ran a story about Amanda's debt scandal, complete with a blurry photo of her being escorted out of her workplace. Susan's name was mentioned too, tied to an ongoing investigation into financial fraud. The man Amanda owed money to wasn't just watching, he was making moves. Meanwhile, Liz had gone silent. The house was eerily quiet, her absence a constant reminder of the life we'd once shared. I should have felt relief, maybe even satisfaction, but instead, I felt empty. I told myself it was guilt not for what I'd done, but for what I'd allowed. I had let Liz and her sisters turn me into someone I didn't recognize, someone cold, calculated, and vengeful. But it wasn't over yet. A week later, I got a call from Susan. Her voice was frantic, trembling with fear. "Mike, you have to help us," she begged. "Why would I do that?" I asked, my voice flat. "Because if you don't, we're all going to pay for this," she said. "Amanda's debt, it's spiraling out of control. The people she owes, they're not just threatening her anymore, they're coming for all of us, Liz included." My grip tightened on the phone. Why should I care what happens to Liz? She made her choice. "She's still your wife," Susan said desperately. "Or at least she was. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Despite everything, part of me still cared. Not about Amanda or Susan, but about Liz. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them. The three of them were holed up at Amanda's house, their faces pale and drawn. "You got some nerve calling me for help," I said, crossing my arms as I stood in the doorway. "Mike, please," Liz said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know what else to do." For a moment, I considered walking away, letting them face the consequences of their actions. But as I looked at Liz, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Genuine fear. "Start talking," I said finally. "And this better be good." What they told me made my blood run cold. Amanda's debts weren't just financial, were tied to something much darker. The man she owed money to wasn't just a loan shark. He was part of a network that dealt in favors, threats, and violence. "You've put a target on all our backs," Amanda said, her voice shaking. "They think we're trying to expose them." "You should have thought of that before you dragged me into your mess," I said coldly. Liz stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Mike, I know we don't deserve your help, but if you don't, this could destroy all of us, please." I stared at her, my emotions a storm of anger, betrayal, and something I couldn't quite name. Despite everything, part of me still wanted to protect her. "Fine," I said finally, "but this is on my terms. And if you even think about crossing me again, I'll make sure to hear is nothing left to save." Chapter 10, Into the Shadows. Helping Liz and her sisters wasn't an act of forgiveness, it was an act of control. If I was going to involve myself in their chaos, it would be on my terms, and only for as long as it suited me. The first step was to confront the man Amanda owed. His name was Vincent DeLuca, a mid-level enforcer for a syndicate that dealt in underground gambling, extortion, and occasionally far worse. He operated from a nightclub downtown, a place with an unassuming exterior that barely hinted at the danger inside. "Are you sure about this?" Liz asked as I prepared to leave that night. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "No," I replied honestly, "but I am not doing this for you. I am doing it because I refuse to let someone else dictate my life." Her eyes filled with something that looked like regret, but I didn't dwell on it. I'd spent too much time reading her expressions and coming up empty-handed. The nightclub was loud, pulsating with music and the scent of desperation. I moved through the crowd, keeping my head low until I spotted Vincent in a corner booth. He was surrounded by 2 bodyguards, his attention focused on a card game in front of him. I approached with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Mr. DeLuca," I said, my voice steady. His eyes flicked up to me, sharp and calculating. "And who are you?" "The man whose life you are about to ruin," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. The bodyguards tensed, but Vincent waved them off, his interest piqued. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. What do you want?" "I want you to leave Amanda and her sisters alone," I said. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You think you can just walk in here and make demands? Do you have any idea who you are dealing with?" "I do," I said, meeting his gaze. "And I also know you are not as untouchable as you think. I've got evidence, recordings, documents, names. All it takes is one email, and the authorities will be knocking on your door." For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back in his seat, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You are bluffing." "Try me," I said, sliding my phone across the table. On the screen was a draft email addressed to a federal investigator with a folder of incriminating files attached. Vincent's smile faltered. "Where did you get this?" "Let's just say Amanda's not as good at covering her tracks as she thinks." I lied. "You want to make this go away? Walk away from them, write off the debt and forget they exist." His jaw tightened, but he didn't immediately refuse. That was the first crack in his armor, and I pressed harder. "You've got bigger problems than 3 women who can't pay their debts," I said. "Cut your losses or I'll make sure those problems find you." After what felt like an eternity, he sighed and nodded. "Fine, they're off the hook. But let me make one thing clear. You ever pull something like this again, and I'll make you regret it." "I'll take my chances," I said, standing up. As I walked out of the club, my heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through my veins. I had just gambled with my life, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was the one holding the cards. When I returned home, Liz and her sisters were waiting, their faces a mix of hope and fear. "It's done," I said simply. Amanda exhaled sharply, collapsing onto the couch. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said. "Don't bother," I said, my voice cold. "You put me in this position, and I won't forget that. This doesn't change what you've done." Liz stepped forward, her eyes searching mine. "Mike, Save it," I interrupted. "We're done, Liz. As soon as the divorce is finalized, I want you out of my life for good." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, but she didn't argue. For once, she seemed to understand the gravity of what she'd lost. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. The fight was over, but the scars it left would stay with me. I had won, but at what cost? Chapter 11. The last move. The weeks that followed felt like waking from a long, fevered dream. Liz moved out the day the divorce was finalized, taking with her the remnants of a life I no longer recognized. Amanda and Susan disappeared from my radar, their ties to me severed by necessity. The silence was deafening at first, but in it, I found clarity. I wasn't just free of Lizzie, was free of the man I had become during those years. The bitterness, the paranoia, the need for revenge, they had consumed me, but they hadn't defined me. One evening, as I sorted through the papers and memories Liz had left behind, I found something unexpected. It was a photograph tucked into the back of an old notebook. The image was of Liz and me, taken during our honeymoon. Her smile was radiant, her eyes full of a joy I hadn't seen in years. I stared at the picture for a long time, the edges of my anger softening. Liz had hurt me in ways I never thought possible, but we hadn't always been toxic. There had been love once, however fleeting or fragile. A few days later, I received an email from Liz. It was short, almost hesitant, and for the first time, it felt honest. "Mike, I don't expect you to forgive me, and I am not asking you to. I just want you to know that I am sorry for everything. I wish I could take it all back, but I know I can't. I hope you find peace. Liz. I didn't reply. What could I say? Her words wouldn't undo the past, and I wasn't ready to let go of the pain entirely. But I didn't delete the email either. It felt like a small step toward closure, even if it came too late. In the end, my revenge had been complete. Liz and her sisters had paid for their betrayals, their lives unraveling in the wake of their choices. But as I stood in the quiet of my new, empty home, I realized something important. Revenge might satisfy the moment, but it doesn't heal the wounds. Healing was my responsibility now. It was up to me to rebuild, to rediscover the person I had been before the lies and the betrayal. Months later, as I walked through a park near my house, I noticed a young couple sitting on a bench, laughing together. They reminded me of Liz and me in the early days, full of hope, oblivious to the storms that might come. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger or bitterness. I felt nothing, and maybe that was the start of something new. As I walked away, I thought about the choices we make, the lines we cross, and the people we become in the process. Liz had taught me a painful lesson, but it was one I wouldn't forget. Trust is fragile, love is fleeting, and sometimes letting go is the ultimate act of strength. The story of betrayal and revenge has ended, but the questions remain. What would you do if faced with the same choices? Would you seek revenge or would you try to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might just inspire someone else. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories that make you question, feel, and think. This isn't just a story. It's a reflection of the choices we all face.